All right, so before we continue with the relationship module, I'm going to do a bit of a few changes on the front end because I noticed that the icons were not showing up, and it turns out that Bootstrap 5 doesn't support glyph icons anymore. So I'm going to use another icon library called FontAwesome, which I've used in the past in other projects, and it's really good. So we're gonna do some changes like really quickly here. The first is gonna be on our base HTML. I'm gonna insert this link for the FontAwesome Bootstrap CDN link that will inject the CSS for the FontAwesome library into our page. The next thing on navbar, I want to add a little bit of like spacing underneath. So I'm gonna add the Bootstrap margin bottom 3, which allows us to put some spacing between the nav and the content below. Next, on the login page, I'm going to use a different button because I was using the button default, which I don't think is like a valid CSS anymore. So that's why the buttons were showing like transparent. So I'm gonna add this as primary for the login and also on the registration page, which is a kind of like a blue button that will look really good. Finally, on the profile page, I'm gonna do a few changes. So the first one is I'm going to change the relationship itself. I'm gonna say that this is primary color to edit the profile. And then here we're gonna replace the icon with the following. So that's how we put a pencil icon instead of the glyph icon that we had before. So that's for the edit profile page, and so I'm gonna copy this and we're gonna put a plus sign in here. And then the color here, we're gonna do a green color for following or adding a friend. And in here, we're gonna use the minus sign. And that's gonna be this icon, F5 minus. And then we're gonna use the red color, which is danger, for the button. So that will give us a little bit of a nicer UI. So now if we start the application, we're gonna see that it looks a bit nicer. We're gonna say, let's look at the login. The button, now it looks blue, and there's that additional spacing here. The same thing with register. Blue button. And now if I look at my profile, I'll see that there's a pencil icon there and the button is blue. And if I visit this other profile, I'll see the add a friend with the plus sign. So that looks good. Perfect. So before we proceed further, we're gonna implement something else that is required, and that is a login decorator. If you've seen any of my other Flask courses, you'll know what I'm talking about. But essentially, it's a function that wraps another function, and it runs some sort of logic that can prevent the function from running if there's something that it doesn't check out. So for example, for the login page, for the username username page or the profile page that we just built, I would like that to be hidden if you're not logged in, and actually redirect you to the login page, login, allow you to log in, and then go back to that page that you were trying to look at. So we're gonna do that through a decorator. So let's build that file in here. So we're gonna do it in the user folder, and we're gonna call this file decorators, because we might have more than one. So let's see how we implement this. Okay, so first we import wraps from FontTools. Wraps in itself is a decorator, and it's a utility for building this type of functions. Then from Quart, we're going to import session, request, redirect, and URL for, which we will need for the decorator. So then we are going to define the decorator called login required, which is being passed a function, and that function is whatever wrapped function that is. So for example, profile view is the function here defined, and then we're gonna apply the wraps as a decorator, and then we define the decorator function itself, which is we're gonna check that the session username is set. So if it's not set, it's gonna be returned to the login page with a next value that we're gonna implement in the view in a moment, with the request URL. So what that means is that we're gonna pass to the login page a next URL, which is what the original profile view the user was requesting. And after that, we just return the function itself and the decorator function. So let's now work on the user views. Okay, so I'm noticing that there's a squiggly line here. It looks like we have to define the type annotation for the decorator. So I'm going to use any for the function as well as for the parameters, because there is some better way to do this, which is a little bit more complicated, and it's also sort of like a proposal at this point. Maybe down the road we'll have a cleaner way to do typing with decorators, but for now I'm just using any, which is not really recommended in lots of cases, but in this case, for simplicity sake, I'm just gonna use any for this. So let's go and start working on implementing the decorator. Okay, so first we're gonna open our user views, and at the very top we're going to include or import that decorator that we just created. Perfect. So next we're gonna go and add on the request method get. We're going to add if the request has the next parameter, then we're gonna store that next URL on a session cookie called next. That way we can store what the URL for the referring page that was protected is sending us to after the login is completed. Next, we're gonna delete this return user logged in, and we're going to add the following section. So if next is in session, then we're gonna get the URL from that session get, store it in that next variable, delete the session next variable, and then return to that URL that we just fetched from there. If there's no next in session, then we're just gonna return the string user logged in as we had before. And now finally on the user name, and notice where I'm putting the login required, it's right after the route. So we're going to say login required in here. And that's it. So if any person, any user comes to this profile page and they're not logged in, then we're gonna, the decorator, we don't even do anything here, as you can see. The decorator takes care of that and goes into that decorator function and checks if the username is not set. Then it remembers the request URL of the profile page that you were seeing and sends you back to the login page, where this function here, when you first land, you get the session next URL stored in, actually gets the next from the request and stores it on the session next. And then when you post the login, that means that you're logged in. Then it checks if there's a next session, gets the value, deletes the session so that we don't have any, session next variables laying around, and then returns us to the redirect page. Okay, so it looks like we have a couple of errors. Here it says returns a response. So I guess we need to add that to the return types. So right now we only have string. And so we want to add a union of either string, which is the user logged in, not variable, but the text that we're sending if there's no next, or a response. And again, notice that we're putting response as quotes because we don't actually want Python to import it on runtime. We only want to have it referenced when there's typing checks. So let's see, I'm missing the bracket here. Perfect. And we have response here on the top. If type checking, then import that response, so that works well. And I think we have one more error. Let's see where it is. Oh, it's here. So it says has incompatible type optional any expected str. Oh, I see. This is saying session get is can return any, because if it's empty, then it's not gonna return anything. So just like as we did before, we have to make it an actual kind of index, because if we're checking that next is in session, that get is unnecessary. So that was that. So I think we're good. There's no other issues, so we can go ahead and test this out. So let's go ahead and run the application. And the first things we want to do is log out so that we don't have any cookies stored, any sessions. So let's try and go and visit the profile page of Luigi. And as you can see, this redirected me to the login page with a next variable here that is URL encoded. That's why it has all those like weird signs. But so if we sign in with my user, we get this error. The response value type coroutine is not valid. Now, what is happening? So if we look at the code again in the login required decorator, we have actually changed this to send the function itself to the decorator. And the function is an asynchronous function. So what's happening is that when we get the function in here, we're actually returning the function, but we're not awaiting for it. So it's returning the coroutine. It's not returning the actual value. So what we need to do is we need to add a sync in here and an await in here. And that way we can get the right return type to the function. So let's see if that works. Let's go ahead and run it. And now it's loading the function. So if we try it again, let's do actually let's go to the user. We get the login request, and then we log in, and we are redirected to the Luity user. So the decorator is now functioning properly. But before I forget, let's add back the function signatures and parameters like we did earlier, because we need to get rid of those squiggly lines. And now if I save the file, perfect. So we don't have any squiggly lines and everything is working correctly. Awesome. So now we're really ready to start looking at the add friend functionality and continue with the relationship module.